commercial hog farm that was proposed. So that is our topic of discussion right now. So as soon as these fellows are done, we're done talking about the hog farm. We do have important business, so we will take care of that after they speak. All right, go ahead.
Do the introduction. Sorry, I didn't hear.
Introduction. Mr. Lenzmeier is going to speak about the hog farm.
Indirectly. What I'll cover today briefly for an opening is to describe the dimension of the ag industry in Stearns County, and then I'll go through and I'll leave the forms for what someone applying for a feedlot, what kind of information they have to supply. And I was supplied with some questions that y'all might have regarding a situation like this. And the process and the forms that I'll leave you with, I only have 3 copies for you and then 1 copy for media, which I've already handed out. But it explains the kinds of information that we ask for when someone wants to do something like this. A lot of people assume that, bang, they fill out a form and we put them on the agenda, and the next thing we know it's A or nay. It's quite a bit more complicated than that. The entire ag industry is very much aware, especially in the last decade, of food safety. And that goes all the way from the producer to the processor to the retailer. As a result, ag practices, as take place out here, are much more sophisticated than they were even in the relatively recent past, the last decade or two. And as you get into the processing end, a lot of self-testing goes on in the processing industry as your food is being processed before it hits the grocery shelves. So as a result, we are in a better spot than we were in the relatively recent past. And then I'll conclude my prepared remarks. In some respects, it's unfortunate that this wasn't taking place, this part of the presentation wasn't taking place, say, 2 weeks ago, because in the last Saturday, breakfast on the farm took place at the Jansky farm, not far away from here. And looking at places like the Jansky farm, you see what current ag practices are like. It isn't your dad's farm anymore. But there's one coming up in Watkins on what I call a landwear farm in July, and I'll share that information with you, and you could tour that to give you an idea. That's a little bit older operation. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. That's a different type of operation, even though it's dairy, than what Jansky's is. It's a larger operation. They use a lot more outside employees than Jansky does, but nevertheless they have to follow the rules, so then you get an idea of what farmers have to do. What's ag like in Stearns County? Well, Stearns County is the top dairy producing county in Minnesota. We're 22nd largest in the country. There's 69,000 dairy cows on 720 farms in Stearns County, and the cows produce 154 million gallons of milk, but that's a 2012 number. What we're seeing is that the number of cows is staying relatively stable, but production keeps going up. So the cows are working harder. Poultry, we're the 2nd largest turkey production county in Minnesota and the 5th largest turkey producing county in the U.S. Stearns County turkey farmers raised 5 million turkeys and 108 million pounds of turkey. The bad news about our poultry industry was the poultry industry in Stearns County was just creamed last year by avian flu. We had 16 flocks that had to be destroyed. I can describe that process. It's ugly what that entails, although Candy, Ohio is the only county that was, which is adjacent, is the only county that was harder hit. They had 34 flocks that had to be destroyed. Other livestock, we have 205,000 head of cattle, and that's dairy and beef. We have more cattle than any other county in the state, and we sold 266,000 market hogs in 2009. So that's obviously dated information, but it was the easiest for me to find. Food processing, we have Land O'Lakes, Kraft Foods, Golden Plump, and Jenny O. And Jenny O has not only a facility in Melrose, but also they have one in Wilmer. And hence, that's how come Wilmer, Candiota County has more turkey flocks than we do. We've got two sets of feedlots. We have one set that you could think of as more as a hobby farmer, say 10 head of cattle or less, and we have almost 400 of those in Stearns County. And while this feedlot issue is new to you, it's not new to Stearns County. The number of the larger feedlot permits we have out, that means that somebody has gone through the entire permitting process or has a grandfathered process, although we now have a statute that says you can have a grandfathered process. The change we made was for this type of farmer. My brother's a good example. I'm the youngest, he's the oldest. When he quit farming and sold his herd, what he did is he maintained his feedlot permit because he felt at the time that might make his operation more saleable if the permit's in place. Somebody buying it wouldn't have to go through the process. Well, he did that for not quite a decade, and that problem really does take care of itself, because what happens to a feedlot facility is they really deteriorate when they're not used. When they are used, the ventilation system operates all the time, the electrical and plumbing system stays in good repair, they don't have the rodent problems that they do when it's vacant. So as a result, if you have any kind of livestock facility that hasn't been operated for a decade, it's probably junk. So the value goes away quite quickly. Relative to the larger operations, we have over 2,000 of those in this county. Some jargon that gets used when talking about feedlot, you'll hear terms like animal units. An animal unit, one animal unit is a cow. So the proposed operation that prompted all of this in this area was 999 animal units. Well, that's hogs. That doesn't mean 999 hogs. It means more hogs than that, because the hog they have a ratio for different types of animals. Chicken is like something like 0.01 animal units, so you get the drift. So a cow is one, little animals are less. And oftentimes, for example, in dairy, the size that's used in talking about dairy facilities is milk cows. So if you have 220 milk cows like the Jansky operation, really you can double that number, because that's a young stock involved, the stuff that's coming up, you know, that the replacement herd that ultimately will be milkers. CAFO, you hear that term, it's called confined animal feeding operation, and it's part of the terminology. NPDES, it's the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System Permit. And so we've got the census here for Stearns County feedlots. The other thing, if you're going to start a feedlot, you don't just come down to Stearns County, fill out your application. Here are just a few of the entities involved in approving an operation like this. The township, and that may include a building code, zoning, and land use permit, a road authority for access, weight limits, and drag hose permits. What's a drag hose? Manure handling now isn't putting the stuff in the spreader and taking out the field. For large volume manure handling, it's now liquefied and pumped. And in fact, when it's applied, oftentimes the most efficient, farmers now regard manure as an asset, and they want to make efficient use of that asset. And so it's often, more and more you're seeing manure application being injected. It's actually injected into the ground by this gizmo that looks like a big tank, and it's got a thing that digs into the ground, and then the liquid manure comes out of that and goes into the ground. And what that does for the general public greatly reduces runoff, greatly reduces streams and pollution and that sort of thing. The county zoning and land use and feedlot permits, MPCA, they have a state feedlot rule, they have a permit process, 2 engineering review, manure management plan review. Manure management plans, think of this, a manure management plan requires the operator to keep records of manure volume, manure applications, manure application rates. One of the questions that I got that was submitted to me a little bit earlier is, well, does anybody ever check those records? When there's a problem, somebody check those records. Otherwise, they're spot checked, not unlike your income tax returns are spot checked. If the service wants to take a look at how your world works, they can come in and take a look. Well, it's a good approximation of what manure records are like. The Department of Health, primarily relative to well codes, natural resources, water appropriation permits. Used to be, back in the day, you could take water out of streams. Not anymore. Let's see. Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, I talked about that because sometimes there's stormwater permits that are needed. Environmental Quality Board, and then the Soil and Water Conservation District for the Natural Resources Service. And the reason that a farmer wants to play ball with them is sometimes it qualifies them for cost sharing. So there are some motivations to do that. Another thing I brought along to show you what an operator has to do for a proposal is a interim permit application, a construction short form, an interim permit application. It's the name and location of the facility, the type of facility. Understand, feedlots don't just apply to dairy or hogs. We have a growing number of goat operations. There's a dairy goat milk processing plant currently under construction in Rockville. You're going to see a lot of dairy goat operations. What's kind of cool about dairy goat operations is for the folks that want to do the organic thing, it's possible with 120 dairy goats and 80 acres to make a living. Now you won't get rich, but you'll make it. And so I'm kind of excited to see that. The Amish over by Grove City have really picked up on this. So currently Stickney Hill Dairy, which is located in Stickney Hill just outside of Marty, near Pearl Lake, the Amish are suppliers for that particular operation. So the number of animals, animal unit factor, a calf, for example, is 0.2 animal units. A horse is layer hen, 0.033. You get the idea. How the hell they came up with that? I don't know. It is. They talk about the buildings in here, manure handling, dead animal storage, surface water management features, sensitive areas, wells, surface tile intakes, manure management. Usually when a manure management plan is required, it's an attachment. It's a complete different document on its own. As I indicated, I'm a commercial real estate appraiser when I work, and easement, the definition of an easement is the right to use the property of another for a specific purpose. About 20 years ago, I thought this was funny at first, but turns out it's pretty common now. There is something called a manure easement. And what a manure easement is the right to spread the manure generated by your operation on somebody else's land. And there's an actual transaction, and it's recorded. And it's if you don't have enough land for your own operation, and you don't have to spread the manure that's generated on your own facility, you have to be able to prove that you have these easements in place. So, you know, the world keeps adjusting. Let's see. Also, they sell manure too, whoever thought. The notifications for an application, let's see. The punchline is these folks don't just show up and say, here we go. So how common is this in Stearns County? Thursday night we just approved another feedlot, a final approval, Section 25, Melrose Township. Sketches, aerials, let's see, yeah, manure management plan checklist. When you go through this, some of these are just boxes to check, but the boxes have to be backed up by certain documentation. So a typical application goes, first of all, an application is submitted to the county. It's reviewed by staff. Staff issues a report. What's happening out here is this issue grew in terms of public knowledge way ahead of where they typically become public knowledge in most cases. And so I was getting calls from, I guess the way to say it would be both sides of this. We got invited out by not only by Larson, but also by the person that owned the property where he was going to be doing manure disposal. The other commissioners went. I always wait for the staff report because to get involved in these things at any other time, it's similar to, you know, a 3-act play. Okay, if you walk into the play in the middle of the second act, you don't know what went on before. If it's a musical and the cool music is in the second half, so no big deal, but that isn't always the case. So I didn't get the staff report, none of us did, but a couple of the commissioners came out and had a look at things, and well, I guess we can do that. I don't, not until I have a staff report. I want that basic background information. This is a planning commission. All the checklists that they go through when they consider one of these. Our planning commission is headed by Leroy Gondringer. He's a dairy farmer from Avon Township and the township supervisor. And we have one other ag operator on our planning commission who has a lot of experience with irrigation. Does that mean that the planning commission is pro-ag? Well, to this extent, they are. They want operators to operate by the same rules that they operate under, which I think is pretty reasonable. But Leroy is, well, we're glad to have him. He brings a lot to our function. Feedlot permit review checklist. And then finally, if you want your second chance to see how a real dairy operation functions in this modern day, the farm tour on July 7th, that's a Thursday, from 12:30 to 1 will be lunch. It's in Watkins, the Landwehr operation, 16909 County Road 2. And there'll be lunch from 12 to 1, 1 to 1:30. There'll be an overview presented by the Landwehrs. 1:30 to 2:45 is a tour. And then from 3 to 4:30, there'll be 4 presentations, and they're titled Economic Impact of Ag in Our Region, Lending and Banking, Nutrition and Feed, and Food Processing and Exporting. As you're probably well aware by now, the Larson application was pulled. Had nothing to do with regulation. I suspect maybe, you know, there's a variety of reasons why it might have been pulled. All I'm talking about here is the regulatory aspect of it. The most important aspect of this, from my perspective, is financing. Financing is really the driver. If you're going to borrow money to do this, the people that give you the money want to make damn sure that everything is on the up and up in case they get the operation back. And so the untold story in all of this regulatory stuff is financing is the key part. Just to do a robotic milking operation like the Janskis did in the recent past, that's $1.5 million. So in terms of quality of life, I guess it's worth it. You can always, I always tease my friends in the west half of Stearns County. You can always tell if a guy my age out there was a farmer because he's got bad ankles and he's got bad knees and he's got bad hips. Yeah, wow, where did you farm? You know, he said, oh, how did you know that? But you know, the traditional dairy practice is really hard on people physically. Yeah, my brother, I mean, you know, in his later years, he was compromised physically. It wasn't pretty, but that's how it went. So, relative to questions and answers, I'll go through a few questions that I got that Jim emailed me, and we'll just